Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of the Unplugged Woodworkings podcast. So this week I have been building a Roman workbench. I haven't had a great deal of time in it. The weather has been a bit hitty-missy, but I have done some of it. Obviously I'm trying to record this outside, so the lighting's good, and obviously I want the sound to be good and everything. Just because I get numerous amounts of comments and people messaging us, asking how to build one and asking, just all types of questions about it. So finally getting out and building one. So there will be plans available for this, as I've said. I'm also thinking, and I'm pretty sure I'm going to go ahead with it, that the book I was writing all this week as well, I've been editing the book. I'm really thinning it down. It's going to kind of be more of a guide. So I think rather than just put the plans out, I'm going to use what I've written. That's basically going to be a guide, and it's going to cover the building of the oak bench that I built. That's like the last bench I built with the shave horse and everything. It's going to have plans for that. Plans for the new one, and I think I'm going to hide the plans in for the poor man's workbench that I did. So that should be pretty much coming out in the next couple of weeks. I think I'm going to just try and tie everything in together with that. So if you're interested, keep your eyes open for that. So also for this podcast, I'm also going to release a blog post to kind of accompany it. I've had quite a few people, not quite a few, but I've had a few people kind of say that they can't understand what I'm saying. The accent basically, so that's understandable. Obviously I've worked all over the UK, so I kind of know what it's like. So it was a bit of a thought quite some time ago, and I said it would probably be good if I done like a blog post to accompany the podcast basically. So also I went onto my blogger page, and I've kind of spruced that up a little bit so it's a bit more not user friendly, but it looks a bit more pleasing on the eye. I personally think so anyway, and I think it's easier reading, especially on a mobile phone. So as I said, there will be a blog post to accompany this. So today I'm just going to kind of talk about like understanding joints, if that makes sense. Like kind of just like, I don't know, there's probably a lot of people, myself included, in the past that you're going to do something, you're going to build like whatever you're going to build, and you kind of just say to yourself, I'll use this joint or I'll use that joint. And me personally, in the past, I've never given it much thought. I've just like kind of said, well, I know that to be a strong joint, and I've never given any thought to like how it's a strong joint, why it's a strong joint, how the joint actually works, and if there would be a better joint to use in that situation, or do I specifically have to use that joint? Is it overkill? So I think it's a pretty good idea for you to like understand joints. If you understand joints, especially if you're designing furniture or you're going to make something, it's just going to be better for you, I personally think anyway. Just for an example, if you look at dovetails, I mean, like, there's probably going to be a lot of people that already know this, and they actually do consider this, but there's going to be a lot of people that don't actually like really think about it or even like considered it. But like, how does a dovetail actually work in the construction of a drawer? When you think about the dovetail is quite a clever joint, and it's probably more so clever when you think about how long it's been about. The first recorded dovetail to date, I believe, it's like Egyptian times. I think it's like 3000 BC, it's somewhere around there. So it's been around for a long time. And there's still a lot of examples of like drawer constructions, dating back to like the 18th century. I think there might be some dating back to the 17th century. I'm not overly sure about the 17th century, but I do definitely know there's some dating back to the 18th century. And the ones dating back to the 18th century, a lot of them are still actually usable. So that's like a bit of a testimony to Dovetail's strength. How a dovetail works. So kind of when you look at a dovetail in a drawer construction, it makes perfect sense when you start to understand what's going on. I mean, so if we look at the tail portion of a dovetail, obviously, if you can picture this in your mind, we've got like a bit of a triangle-like shape or a wedge-like shape, and obviously we've got the pins, and the pins fit into these. So there's only one way these pins are going to fit in, and that's, if you're looking at a drawer construction, that's going to be left to right. Basically, that's how it's going to fit in. Going to slot in like fingers, obviously dovetails. But when the force is pushed against, obviously the back of the pins, that's hitting the shoulders, so that's solid. That ain't going anywhere. That's not a problem. It's not an issue. So the clever part with this, and this is the reason why the front of drawers are always the pin board, is because the pins are like a wedge-like shape, if you like. So when you're pulling, it's it's how to explain it. It's basically like a wedge. If you kind of think about it, as you're pulling, you're trying to pull a wedge through like a really small gap. It's just not gonna go. For you to pull that wedge, for you to pull that dovetail board out through the tails, you're actually going to have to damage the wood. You're going to have to break the fibers apart. And that's not an easy thing to do. That's if you just using it regularly type of thing, But even if you were to try and force this, I mean, I've never actually done it, but I could quite imagine if you tried to kick a dovetail drawer apart, especially if it was like a hardwood like oak and stuff. I don't think it would be a 2-minute job. I mean, obviously if you stood on it like in a diagonal sense, yeah, the dovetails are going to fail quite easily. But if you were like basically just like trying to kick the front off, I think you'd be there for quite some time trying to do it. So when you understand that, it makes perfect sense that when the front of that drawer is going to be getting pulled and pushed for the next 100 years, for argument's sake, you can understand why, they last for 100 years, basically. But it's, as I've talked about dovetail strength before, it's quite a good joint. I think it's probably one of the best butt joints, I would say. Not a butt joint, like a 90-degree joint. Me personally, I think so. But they're actually quite good, like just in a U shape as well. I've thought about this. So it's kind of the same again. It's the orientation of your pins and your tails is going to like determine how well things work. Obviously, if you were to put the tail portion and use that as a front, like the front of the drawer, it stands to reason that like in time you're going to basically pull the front of the drawer off. Obviously I don't think anyone would do that. Maybe someone who was just starting out and that didn't like fully understand what they were doing, perhaps. I've never seen any examples of this, but it's anything's possible in woodworking, isn't it? But as I was saying, when you look at like simple like U shapes, I've actually built not quite a few, but I've built several tables with like a U shape, and the two corners have actually been joined with dovetails. Now they're quite strong, just a U shape it's by itself, so it's only got the two joints to support itself, and there's actually quite a lot of strain and stress that goes on them two joints when you think about it. And when you look at how they work as well, it's quite clever. Same again, you've got the wedge, you've got the kind of like the pin portion or like the wedge action. That's, it's kind of stopping it from, like being pulled out. But also when you're pushing one edge of it, the unsupported edge or the unsupported corner that hasn't been dovetailed, so that's actually causing the very bottom of that board to push against the shoulders of the tail section, and then obviously you've got the wedge section, like kind of like fighting with it as well. So in that sense, they are quite strong. I mean, you could argue that you shouldn't do it, and I'm pretty sure there's a lot of people, that would that would argue with us about that. But I like to test things out, and downstairs in my sitting room, there's actually, how long have I had that table for now? I think it's like be coming up to 2 years. I made that table 2 years ago, and it's just like like two corners of dovetails. It's a basic U shape, and it's as strong as the day I made it. It's as strong as the day I glued it up. It just has not budged. But as I've said, I've just basically described how that joint would work. And the table itself, it is actually quite strong. I can basically stand on top of that. I can shuffle around on top of that table, my full weight. I've sat on it. I've done all sorts on it, and it's, as I said, it's really, really strong joints. It's a really strong table, So when we look at mortise and tenon joints, they're quite a good joint as well. But same again, if you understand how they work, you can appreciate it, and you can think to yourself, when you're designing pieces of furniture, maybe a mortise and tenon joint would be, ample to use in that situation. Or at the same time, you might think to yourself, it's possibly a bit too much overkill. I think a good example of a mortise and tenon joint in use, and this is actually what I've used in the blog post, is a chair constructed out of mortise and tenon joints. When you kind of understand what's happening with the joints, you can kind of understand like why some chairs anyway are really strong when they've been constructed out of a mortise and tenon joint. I mean, when we're looking at a mortise and tenon joint, we've obviously got the mortise, we have the tenons, often we'll have haunches, and we've got the shoulders. I personally think one of the stronger mortise and tenon joints, me personally, would be to have a shoulder going all the way around the tenon portion. Obviously, I don't think it should be too thick, and I don't think it should be too thin. With the tenon itself, it should be proportioned, if you like. I think, you basically get told to, or at least I did when I was in college, to divide the material into three. So you'd have 2/3, that would be the shoulder, and then the middle third would be your mortise and tenon, your tenons. I think that's a pretty good rule of thumb. I believe it's like standardish, although I could be wrong. But that's kind of what I've got in my head. So when you think about it, as long as the joint's cut well, you've got the tenon that fits into the mortise. If the mortise isn't, if it's been cut nice, nice and proper, if you've taken your time and you've paid all the edges down, it's a nice, tight, snug fit. And all of your shoulders are nice and square. There's, so all of the shoulders in like a it's got good contact with the face, I mean, that's going to be a really strong joint. So once you've got that joint in there, and for argument's sake, let's just say we've got that glued up. So if you look at this like in a construction of a chair, like the two back legs. So if we've got the two back legs and they're coming from the floor and it's going up to shoulder height, so we have got, just for argument's sake, we're going to say we've got 3 backrests. We have the seat rest, and sometimes you'll have like an undercarriage leg mortise and tenon joint, like a rail. So if you've got all those mortise and tenon joints, in the nice tight crisp fits, in the nice and snug, and as they're all glued up, when if you're trying to put a downward force, like a kind of a, how can we put this? If I lift one of the legs up, one of the sides of the chair up, so we're basically gonna be rocking the chair. But if you can imagine, say, rocking the chair left to right rather than backwards and forwards, how you would normally do it, or how children would normally do it. You can picture them at the table and they're rocking backwards and forwards on the 2 back legs. But I'm talking about 1 back leg and 1 front leg, so like rocking that way. So if you can picture that, and if you can picture, we're holding the back leg, and on the opposite back leg, that's actually elevated off the ground because it's obviously we're rocking the chair, and we start pushing down on that leg, you can start to like see and understand the action of the shoulders, and obviously the tenon, like everything's in unity, everything's working together. So when you press down on that, it's kind of the force is exerting itself, and the bottom portion of the shoulder on the tenon section of the rail, that's pushing into the face. When this is pushing into the face, you've got the top portion of the tenon itself, and that's pushing against the top of the mortise. And while it's pushing against the top of the mortise, it's actually wanting to pull itself out as well. So obviously you've got the glue, what's obviously keeping the whole thing together. But as I said, everything's working in unity. So as you've got the shoulder and it's trying to pull itself out, and it's pushing against the top of the mortise, the force is just being transferred. So as that's trying to pull out, you've got the shoulder trying to like stop it. So the force is just going round in a constant circle, if you like. Obviously, if you put enough force on it, it is gonna pop out, or it's gonna break. But as I said, everything's working in unity. Obviously there's more variations to this. If you've got a tenant, I'm actually looking at my bed now, my bed frame, and the headboard is obviously it's solid oak. I think the whole bed's solid oak, and there's like at either end of the headboard section, there's like I forget the size of the tenon, but it's like a really big tenon. But I can't remember if it was 3 or 2. It might have been like 2. So if you can imagine the tenons, I've got like a castle shape, if you like a castle tenon. I'm not overly sure the correct terminology for it, but basically at one end where the tenon starts, I've got a haunch. So the haunch comes in, I can't remember the size of it, and obviously we've got the tenon section. And then we've got the middle section cut out, and then out the bottom there's another haunch, and then obviously we've got another tenon section that goes back down into a haunch. I'm guessing maybe about 9 inches, in total. So if you are using something like this, I think this is better again, because rather than rather than having one big tenant, I think if you put one big tenant in, I think it's going to be more liable to move around. Obviously, you've got the shoulders making good contact all the way around, but when it's forcing itself up, you've actually got, in essence, you've got two tenants. I know it's kind of only one tenant, but it is. Would you say technically two tenants? I'm not sure if you could, but basically you've got like two. You've got two tops of the tenons pushing against the two tops of the mortises, So I think that's a better variation, I think that's going to personally give you more strength. So obviously going back to the chair, when you kind of think about what I'm saying here and you understand it a bit, you can understand why a chair kind of resists racking. And obviously this is the same going backwards and forwards as well. It's exactly the same principle, so it's like I said, this, if you understand this, then you can understand why a good handcrafted mortise and tenon chair will resist things like this, and it's difficult to break. Not that you'd want to break it, but obviously, people tend to swing off chairs and rock on chairs, and children do it all the time. So, thinking about this and understanding it, you kind of can appreciate why they don't just break. On the step that I've just made, anyone that hasn't seen this step, I did actually do a build video on it, and obviously there's pictures of it on my Instagram. There'll be a link in the description if you want to go and check those out. But as kind of when I built that, I did actually I got a question off somebody that was asking, is there kind of any benefit to constructing the back rail, or how I constructed the back rail. So for anyone that hasn't seen it, this was a simple step. It was constructed with dovetails, and I added a back rail. The back rail was like a half lap, half blind, or a half dovetail, however you want to say it. So basically it was like a half lap joint and obviously half a dovetail. So someone was asking, would it be better off, doing a full dovetail, like a full half lap dovetail, or is it okay as it is? So for me personally, I didn't really feel the need to do like a full on dovetail, but I did explain to the guy that if there was like a pulling portion on it, a pulling force on it. So if you can imagine that we've got a U shape, same again constructed with dovetails, and if we're going to be pulling the two feet section of that apart, if there was like always a constant force, pulling that joint apart, then yeah, I think I would actually go for like a dovetail, like a full dovetail roller. But what I'd done was sufficient for what I wanted it for. Me personally, I think so anyway. But when you look at a half lap joint, I mean, because I could have put a mortise and tenon joint in there. I could have. I just didn't feel the need for it then. But the joint I did use, obviously the half lap with the half dovetail, I thought that was enough. It was a quicker joint to cut, I think so personally. But same again, when you look at how that works, you've got your back rail, obviously, and it's a half lap joint, so you've got the shoulders again on the half lap joints at either end, and obviously they're making contact with the inside of the two leg portions. So when they're fixed into place and obviously glued up, it's going to be kind of like a similar effect of a mortise and tenon joint, because you've got them shoulders. Them shoulders are going to help to resist any racking, left to right. obviously you've got the half flap, half dovetail section, and that's actually going to stop it from pulling out. But kind of when you think about it, if we've got like an N shape, if you like, so if I put force on one side of one of the corners, and I push that to the just say to the left, for argument's sake. So if I push that to the left, the shoulders on the left side of the rail, they're going to start losing contact, and you're going to start like, this is obviously if you apply enough force, you will obviously start getting like a bit of a gap at the top of the shoulder section. But the good thing about this, how it works, obviously when that's trying to push itself out, you've actually got the other side, the right hand side, and that shoulder is actually making contact there. So it's the same again, the kind of force. It's just like a circling force. It's constantly like, once you put force on one section, it transfers the force to the other section. That goes to the other section and it transfers itself back, and it's just like going round in a circle. I don't know if I'm making sense here. I feel like I'm babbling on a bit. I kind of know what I'm saying in my head. But it's actually quite interesting when you think about all the forces that are going round. I mean, it's like some of the joints are like really clever. It's like the same as a scarf joint. It's like a Japanese style scarf joint. There'll be a picture of this on the blog if you want to check out the joint that I'm talking about, because there is actually like a lot of different variations of a scarf joint. There's all the Western style scarf joints, what I'm not like kind of like a fan of. I think the Japanese style joints, I think they're just like a lot stronger. I'm actually intending on like doing not a build video, but like basically showing how to cut one of these joints, and I'm actually going to try and like test it, like to destruction. Basically, I'm going to try and break the joint. I think it's I'm not really a big fan of just making joints for joint's sake. Anyone that's read any of my blogs or listened to us on here, you'll probably heard us say like I'm not like a fan of it. So I really think if you're going to practice a joint, you should practice a joint, but try and make something with the joint. If it's dovetails, maybe make a small keepsake box, or even if you're going to make a dovetail box, just to keep your screws or something in. It's still practicing, you're still getting used out of it. So I'm very big on that. So this is not something I would normally do, but I think it would be pretty cool. Because the more I thought about this as I was writing the blog, the more I thought it would be interesting just to kind of try and break the joint, just to see how strong it is. Because I'm actually very interested in a lot of the Japanese joints, although I haven't cut many of them, if I'm honest. But some of them are just so unique, and some of them are just so like strong. So I'd really like to do that. Anyway, when you look at one of these types of scarf joints, you've got like 4 sections of end grain, basically touching each other, and this end grain it gets. The joint, in the middle of the joint there's actually a peg that goes in, not a peg, a wedge, sorry, and the wedge obviously gets tapped into place, and it pushes the 4 pieces of end grain together, basically compacts them together. And it's quite clever as well, because when you think about it, these joints have been around for hundreds and hundreds of years. I'm not sure how old they are, but I do know they're in the hundreds, so it is actually quite clever. But I think it's a bit of more of a testimony to what we don't understand and the knowledge we've lost. Obviously, it's well known that ancient people have they had more connection with the natural world. They were able to better utilise the materials and etc. There's been quite a lot of this lost, which is a real shame. But anyway, going back to the joint, so when we've got a compression of the four pieces of the end grain obviously being compressed together. Anyone that's been woodworking long enough knows that the end grain is the hardest part of the wood. It's the least part that's liable to compress. Obviously, it's just because of the structure of wood. It's the same reason why when we hit the chisels, it's obviously how chisels are made. It's kind of, we're hitting the top of a chisel, and it's very resistant. Obviously, over time, you will get a bit of a mushroom effect because you're constantly hitting that. But in the way of a joint, it's not getting hit; it's just getting compressed together, pushed together, and then obviously, it's over time. It probably would get, well, it definitely will get compressed, and depending on the forces, it's like I say, I don't really know how much one of these would actually take, because I do believe this was in Japan, at least. It was used in the West done it as well. Use it for joining beams together, in the construction of houses and such. But I haven't really researched this, and I might actually research it. But it would be quite interesting to know the kind of what the kind of able to take. If you were to do this joint and actually put this joint in, just say in the second floor. If we were building a house and we were ready to put the second floor in, and we actually used one of these beams with one of these joints in, I wonder how much that would, how much force it would take. If you were able to actually span that from, wall to wall, and you had the joint actually in the middle, I wonder if that would be, if it would take that, take the forces. It would actually be quite interesting to find that out. I did have a quick Google search, but it didn't really bring up much information. I think that's a problem with the Japanese stuff. I think a lot of it's, you've got to really delve into it and really do a lot of research. And then when you do a lot of research, you're not always guaranteed to find out what you're looking for, in my experience anyway. So again, with a joint, when you think about how it's working, obviously when the force is pushing down, just say we are using it in the second floor for this example, when the force is pushing down, you're actually, it's like the end grain is pushing against each other, and as I was saying before, the end grain is the hardest part of the wood, so, it's quite ingenious, and obviously, you've got one end pushing down, forcing itself together, and you've also got the other side of the joint that's pushing itself together, and then obviously for it to actually fail, you've really got to compress the end grain together, and obviously in the section of in the middle section of the joint, you've actually got that wedge portion. So all the examples I've ever seen of this of the wedge section, it's always been a different wood. So I'm guessing, and it would make sense, that wood would be a very hard, dense wood. I couldn't really give you anything off the top of my head, but I would imagine it's a very, very hard wood, and it resists compression, I would imagine. So it is kind of good how the joint works, So obviously it's pushing. You've got the four pieces of end grain pushing against each other. Then obviously you've got that wedge section. So that wedge section has basically got to, it's got to fail. It's got to be compressed. And that's a good thing about it as well. So you've got the four sections of end grain pushing against each other, but where the wedge goes in, you've actually got the wedge pushing against two sections of end grain as well. So it's quite a clever joint. It's the same again. You've got a lot of force. You've got a lot of things going on in that joint. I really don't think I'm kind of explaining myself very well here. I feel I'm babbling a bit, like I normally do. I actually think I'm going to call it there, because I don't feel I'm doing this much justice. I think, to be honest, I think I explained it a little bit better on paper or on the blog, if you like. If you want to check that out, there'll obviously be a link in the description. Just click on the link tree, and obviously that's got all of my contents, everything's here. So if you've got any questions, by all means, send us a question, email us, leave a comment on my social media, and I'll get back to you. If you've got anything you want us to talk about, by all means, same again, leave a comment or send us an email. Next week, I'll probably most likely be talking about the Roman workbench. I think maybe like the construction of it, possibly. I'm probably going to be doing like a lot of coverage of that. This is just basically because I get so many questions about it. So I'm possibly going to be covering the build of it. Obviously, there's going to be an article about it, and obviously should be releasing the book and everything and the build video. So possibly next week, if not, it'll be the week after. So I'd really appreciate it. Yeah, get back to us. Let us know what you want to listen to. Let us know what you want to hear, because sometimes it just my mind goes blank. Sometimes it can be quite frustrating to try and think of something to talk about. So I'd really appreciate it if you get back to us with some questions or some ideas. Would be really grateful. I would be really grateful, rather. Thanks for listening, guys. Also, thanks for everyone that's been subscribing to my YouTube. It just seems to be going up day by day. So a big thank you to everyone that's done that. Really appreciate it. Until the next time, thanks very much, and I'll see you later.